The Front Row Back Row podcast is a show where two grad school buddies discuss physical therapy entrepreneurship. I helped guide a company to an 8-figure exit, and I'm now starting my own mobile company. Brian grew his mobile practice to 4 clinics, and he's now doing $1 million in revenue. Join us as we help you grow your own business. Hello and welcome to the Front Row Back Row podcast. I am Dr. Owen Campbell. I am the owner of Simplify Motion in Phoenix, Arizona. And with me, as always, is Dr. Brian Wolf, owner of Evolution PT and Fitness in Connecticut and Long Island. How are we doing today, Brian?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Let's do this.
We're recording from a library again on my side, so apologies for the echoes or the beeping. I think there's construction, so life of a mobile therapist.
Exactly,
Today we are going to be talking about big news out of the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, that they are now saying they're going to take backsies on non-compete clauses. So if for those who are not aware, there was just a ruling put out by the commission. So the commission is not a legislative body, so it's not a law, that said that non-competes are no longer enforceable. Now, there is a part of that ruling that does exempt non-profit entities from that. So for-profit businesses can't give non-competes. And there is structural differences too. I was looking into it a little bit. If you earn over a certain amount, things like CEOs, some of those other ones where it would be pretty hard for them to, it would be a very big issue if they competed directly. Those higher level ones, sometimes there's a little exemptions for theirs. I haven't read into it much because it doesn't, unless for maybe 2 or 3 listeners of this podcast, it really only affects mostly small business owners, managers. And this is essentially saying, the Biden administration saying, we want to get rid of this. There's been some momentum for this for a long time, but it never really got to that level. And now the commission has done it. So I'm going to go in a little bit to explain where this, may go from here future wise. But this is going to be kind of the topic that we touch on today.
Yeah, man. When you first told me about this, I was like, what I think will be interesting is Owen definitely has a good, unique idea on the politics of it all and like how it kind of functions. So that's going to be some really cool insight he shared with me, and I was like, you need to talk about that today. That's great. And for me, I react on it from like a small business owner perspective, and so I think it's interesting because I know a lot of companies, a lot of hospitals out there that lock guys and I shouldn't say just guys, but people into obviously physical therapists, and this is bigger than just PT, right? This is all healthcare people locking them into, and this is actually a really
everybody really this affects tech, this affects everything. Yeah,
you're so right. I mean, in our field, like as a business owner, what it should do in theory is it should make businesses have to compete on more level footing in terms of happiness, right? Because or pay out of the pockets, right? Be like, your life's gonna suck, but I'm gonna pay you really well. That's one of the
let's set the stage a little bit. So as it stands right now, it is not time for you to go to your boss and say, screw you, throw the piece of paper on the ground and walk down the street. It is still enforceable. There's, I think, a 4-month, 120 days window on it that, it's still enforceable to that point. But what Brian was talking about, alluding to, is the politics of it. So there's that window, but we are in April, so that would be in August, right? Well, the election's in November, and the Federal Trade Commission is an appointee in the I believe it's still the executive branch. So if Biden loses, then Trump will come in, or I think Trump is officially now the nominee for the Republicans, but Republicans are against this, right? Or typically tend to be against this. So it may die federally within a few months of his life, right? So it may be something that we have for kind of a golden window there, and then not be enforceable. The other part of this is probably going to get tied up on appeals. There's a lot of very expensive lobbies that don't want this to happen, but there's also expensive ones that do want this to happen. So there's going to be a court battle. It will not be easily done. So PSA, do not go to your boss tomorrow. It is still enforceable. And the second thing to look at is if this does come into play and say the Democrats do take the executive branch, but they don't take one of the houses, or so if they don't take the legislature, this could then be it could be a setup for a law. So it could go that way. There could be legislation on it if there's that much passion around it. And the other thing, too, is if the Republicans come in and they kill it at the federal level, you got to know your state politics. So if you have a state that is one side or the other, they may decide to enact or repeat or basically put a prohibition on something like this at that level. So business owners keep watching this. And especially people who have a non-compete clause in their contract, be wary, right? It's a good sign for the worker with a non-compete that this is at least being talked about, but it is no way final.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, like my first thought process behind that, and obviously that was a really good detailed like explanation to us who are not into politics and understanding how it works. But for me, like, look, there's a company that's down the road, right? That we have interviewed at least 2 or 3 of their physical therapists, and some of them are down the road, some of them are not down the road. They've got multiple clinics all over the place, and so I think one of the things that happen with non-competes is this company in particular is known for, if you leave and you go to the competition, they're going to sue. Like, they're going to come after you and they're going to enforce that thing. And so a lot of these guys are super unhappy that are going to, working as a physical therapist, that are afraid to leave because they're afraid of getting sued. And so unless they're going to leave the area altogether, they're not messing around with that. So I think, that's the type of stuff that happens within our organizations. I mean, obviously, you had mentioned one of the big lobbyists, like big healthcare hospitals are probably going to be one of those big lobbies because they're going to be afraid, oh my God, like what if somebody leaves, like they'll have a max exodus. And if that happens, then they're like, oh, what are we going to do? Well, they should have a mass exodus if people are super pumped about their jobs, right? Super excited. How many times we talked about, happiness at work. And that's really what companies need to be doing. And so, I'm happy to tell people that all of Evolution, coast to coast, we don't actually have any non-compete. So like, this won't affect me one bit, right? If anything, it'll actually affect me in a positive way, because in theory, all those PTs that want to come jump ship because they're not happy with their other job will probably come work for us. And so all of a sudden our pool just opened up. And so, I think that's where people are going to be in, this is why companies though, like, you hear about like the Googles and like, they started making, a work-life balance type of thing where, you're excited to show up to work. And I don't mean it by like working less hours or working this because, to your point, like if PT's like, I want more money, right? It's like, I'm going to be like, listen, but at the same time, like for us, that's not going to be a problem. So it's not even that thing. But if someone's like, I want more money to do the job I'm doing or I'm leaving, if you have a good talent pool around you of new PTs that'll be coming in, like that won't be a problem, right? So what ultimately will happen is the bad companies will get spanked here and the good companies will win. And so I think that's kind of an interesting point about this, because I don't usually see, politics reaching into our field that much, but I think this is one of those ones that could actually have an interesting effect if it actually happens. I mean, all this stuff, obviously, like you mentioned, could be tied up and not actually be a thing.
Well, and you think about the market correction. I mean, this is essentially a way of putting your thumb on the scale if you're a person who loses a lot of employees. PTs don't make a big span, even the director level. They don't make a big difference going from one company to another. We all have the same reimbursement rates. You can only see so many people in a day. There might be a few $1,000s difference, but is it enough to hire a lawyer? So a lot of people will stay in a crappy situation because they don't want to commute 10-mile radius away for a year just to come back to the competitor down the street. They say, well, okay, I guess it's not too bad. And they just stay in the job. Right. And then they get dissatisfied, and then it leads to negative things. So like anything, like if you look at cable companies, right, the Cox Communications, Spectrum, Comcast, they were relying on legislation to keep them in business. So if you rely on that stuff, something like this, it'll pull the rug out from under you. So from a business strategy standpoint, I love what you guys are doing, where you're saying, look, you can leave if you want, but you're not going to want to leave, right?
Yeah.
That will be a tried and true way of keeping people happy, because you're focusing on the things that keep them happy, right? Because we can't really toggle the money switch in PT, right?
Yeah.
We don't, at least in private practice PT.
I did an interview this morning where I said that to PT. I literally said to her, and I've started like being really transparent. I'm like, there's a ceiling and a floor, and they're really close. And I think
Mhm.
that's what's really happened in this profession. And I think that they used to be a larger gap when we first came out, but I think now it's become a much larger, much smaller gap. And I think as far as like job happiness, like that to me is a big piece of this, right? Like how to get excited and like how to be a part of that process. So
Mhm.
to me, I think that's you just nailed it, man. Like I think, and it's funny, because kudos to my business partner here because he's the one who was all about it. Because I remember at one point we have had a few that we've been like, maybe we should do a non-compete here and there, and he's like, I don't want to be that company. And I was like,
Yeah.
let's do that. And then what's funny is that point, like, here's where it's going to bite some of these companies in the ass because, I remember
Mhm.
when I first started my business, I had a non-compete and I checked it and I didn't and, this is kind of goes back to like should PT sign non-competes even in the get-go and like I will
Mhm.
never sign another non-compete ever and I'll tell them I'll be like that is just a no-go for me like sorry like and now when you're younger in your career
Unless you sell your company for billions of dollars, yes.
well, yeah. It's also one of those things like say I took another job somewhere, right? And I was like, there,
Mhm.
you have to have a non-compete. I'd be like, well, I'm not gonna, why would I sign that? Like, what's the point of my non-compete?
Mhm.
Well, and someone says, well, if you open up a place down the road, it's like, all right, well, then I'll sign a non-compete that I won't open a place up down the road, right? But why do you got
Mhm.
to give me a 10-mile radius from every location you ever have? Like, that's
Yeah.
dumb. Like,
Yeah.
you're just, what you're trying to do is, and that's what happened. I had the same company. His kid had a relationship at one of the colleges here the
Mhm.
colleges was 9.8 and again the relationship was his he was a
Mhm.
physical therapist who knew all the athletic trainers he went there he set it up for that company they set up some of the reimbursement stuff the insurance whatever
Mhm.
so when he left we knew that if he left like he would take that with him he didn't actually
Mhm.
come on with us he went with one of these other companies and sure enough that company sued and was like I don't want to lose that business but you're gonna lose the business anyway because like your PT
Yeah.
is gonna be pissed, right? So it's like
Yeah.
it's not it was just like and now the guy's upset, so now he's definitely leaving, right? So now it's
Yeah.
like or he's gonna stay legally because he's upset, and then something like this happens, and yeah, you are gonna have a mass exodus because quite frankly,
Mhm.
instead of having onesies and twosies that are leaving like one PT left here and then one PT left there, and like this is why and it's explainable, you're gonna have like 50 of them leave all in one shot. And now you're gonna be really in trouble, and so
Yeah.
that to me is the bigger issue. Like, when people talk about turnover, like stuff happens, right? Like people move
Yeah.
away, people have kids, people want to go, make more money somewhere else. Like they want to go in a different field. Like it is
Yeah.
what it is, right? So like as long as you're working on like to your point, the money's not going to be the thing that makes people leave. It's going to be the opportunity that a lot of
Mhm.
times makes people leave. Like so I think that's or they don't like somebody within the company. That's a big one too, right? So
Yeah.
people don't like
Well,
me, they'll just leave.
yeah, and I think that saves you a lot of headache as a business owner having your strategy like that because then how do you know if your retention strategies are working? Are they staying because I make them or are they staying because I tried this new way of active listening that I read about in a book, right? Or we did a different mentorship program and this is kind of where I think that it's incumbent upon the business owner especially as you scale where you can't have a direct relationship with everybody every day to really kind of put in place systems that will make it so that you have the turnover that you talked about I moved away, I'm doing a different career, some of those like kind of natural, you're not going to avoid that turnover, not the like, oh god, finally the government let me do this thing and now I'm leaving, or I hate this place so much I'll take a job in the suburbs to then come back in the city in a year, so I think, you know, one of the things that business owners can do is really put a lot of emphasis on developing your people. So I'm curious to know, Brian, now that you have multiple locations, right? And you built to what you're building and you can't be at everyone. Like, what do you do to kind of coach up your directors to kind of help them with specifically retention, right? To make people happy that these non competes are trying to do just with a piece of paper.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, like when you, it's funny, man. When you just talked about that, like what popped into my head was, people business owners in physical therapy and in general need to realize a very specific fact when it comes to what you just spoke about, and it's that no one is going to care about my company more than me, right? It's just the
Mhm.
reality of the situation, and that's cool. Like I need to be just accepted of that fact. So like
Mhm.
I was talking with a PT owner the other day who's like, I was like, when do you take lunch? He was like, I don't take lunch. I got to work straight through the day. He's like, we stay till 8 o'clock at night. He's like, I'll see whatever patients I need to. And he's like, it's almost like that's his expectation for every other single employee that he has. And I'm like, this is not going to happen, man. And in fact, what you're going to do is every PT that comes in and works for you is going to hate you after a while and be out, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's what he's struggling with. He's struggling with retention and getting, you know, people through the door. And so what's happening for us is we're a much more cool option for a lot of other people because we care. Like somebody said this to me once, that's managers, like, if I take care of you, you'll take care of my patients. Right. And it's like, that's exactly what I talk to people about. I'm like, I want to work on my employees, help them go in the, even if I got somebody right now who, like, I know they're not going to be with me forever. Right. They're like, they want out at a certain point to do pro sports. I'm like, that's cool. Like, let me help you get there. But in the meantime, like, there's some growth you can do here while you're doing that and help us, and we can help you. And that's a mutual relationship. And so as long as you continue to help people reach their goals, and the 90% of the people will keep loving you and want to grow within your company. Like, we have like 7 PT set, like people who want to work for a company right now. We don't have positions for all those people. And so that's like an amazing position to be in, where I don't want to say be a bully, but on the other side, where I'm hiring, be like, hey, like, I need your answer now, because I got another person behind you that wants that job. So like, if you don't want it, that's cool. Like, you know, so I think to go back to your initial, I'm tangenting, but to go off to your initial question, I think a lot of it is giving people really good, you know, balance between what they want to do and what they need to do. Not so much time, not so much that, you know, so it's like, what do you want to do? What do you want to grow into? And then you find the people who want to be leaders within your company, because a lot don't want to do that, right? They don't want to do that. Some people want to teach, some people want to go into consulting, some people want to go into, you know, just being a really good physical therapist. Some people want to be clinical directors. So I think the other part of it is you know, you had touched on this before, was how to make more money within the clinic, without having to be like a leader only. Like, sometimes I think that's a thought process in some of these corporate models is, you know, you have to work your way up to corporate ladder, kind of like what you talked about, what you had to do was, I have to work my way up to corporate ladder and be more of a leader to make more money. And then what ends up happening is you get to a point where you're like, I'm out, because I can't make any more money. I get to do this on my own. So a lot of it is like, I'm going to give you lots of other passion projects you can work on, and being a leader is just one of them that you are in this company.
Yeah, and I think that's a big point, is knowing your people, understanding what makes them tick, giving them that opportunity. Let them have an Instagram handle, like all these different things that I see some asinine clinics and companies where, well, you can't put our name on your thing and you have to get permission. Like, no, man, let them go, right? Because I think that the biggest thing is they will come back, they will stay with you if they feel like their time is well spent. And when you look at a bigger picture, if you have multiple clinics, coaching your managers on that, right? Constantly touching with your managers about, like, hey, is this guy motivated? Have you found out what makes him tick? Has that changed? What are your one-on-ones like? All those different things. And really focusing your managers, you know, maybe the people who are taking over when you're not in the room, right, to have the same kind of radar that you do of, ooh, that guy said something in the break room, and that's not great, right? So it's not that your manager has to, like you said, work until 8 o'clock and just be that lead by example thing, because that's, I mean, it's only going to motivate like 20-30% of people, right? You need someone who can morph and, you know, connect with the people who want connection, and like show, like, you know, grit to the people who want to see grit, right? So those are the things when we're looking at the problems that non-competes are trying to solve: retention, right? Because I mean, let's be honest, they're not trying to make it so that you don't steal secrets. Like, yeah, again, I get it. A higher level CEO leaves, and then he goes, like Boeing guy goes to Airbus and says, "Oh, these are our plans for our next big launch." Like, yeah, that's a non-compete. That's probably a bad thing. But in physical therapy, what are you taking, right? Like a doctor, maybe, right? Like 2. But if the other place doesn't take that insurance, you know, so it's a retention strategy,
So
which is,
I totally agree
it's a
with you,
lazy
man.
one.
It's a lazy one, and it's a fucking mean one, to be honest with
Yeah,
you, right? Like, when you
yeah.
really look down on it, like, in that point, and like, it's funny, man, because like what just popped in my head was, like, we had a content creator come here, so we just hired somebody like that's going to create content. We're going to put on our Instagram and like do stuff like that, and kind of promote more stuff organically on social media. And the first thing I did was, he was like, we'll post videos of you, and we'll talk about, like, you can talk about different things within the company. I was like, I don't want it to be about me. I was like, what I want you to do is, I'm going to put the mic on 2 of my PTs, and I want you just to follow them around with their patients. And he followed one, then the other. Like, 0 was about me. And my PTs, you could tell they were kind of like the bigger biggest mistake that I made was I didn't like give them any heads up. So they're like, we would have done
Yeah.
this. We would have done
Oh,
that. And
that's
so like,
mean.
it was totally like they know me well enough to know that like my brain wasn't in that place. And I was like, whatever, you guys are fine. You guys will be fine. And so what ended up happening was with this guy coming in, we were going to hire him and bring him on, to do this stuff, this work with us. And so I told him, I was like, I want you guys to be ready to do that kind of stuff because this is where I want to promote. It'll be so good for our physical therapy and like promote them and promote our, promote what we do with patients. And so, those are the types of things where like, it's not putting me first. Like the company's not, if I want to grow our company, it can't be just about me because if it is, it won't scale. Right. It's gotta be about them and about what we do. And that's gotta be, somebody asked me today, like, what would you want your PT philosophies to be and how would you want their PTs to act and work? And I was like, oh, that's an awesome question and very loaded. But I was like, I want you to, basically take all of our culture and all of our, philosophies and all of our missions. And I want you to like fulfill those, right? And like be that person. And a lot of those are very admirable things. Non-competes are not something that are part of that. So like to your point, like it's truly a retention strategy. So if you're trying to retain those people, the idea, what I think is more important is to have a clear-cut company mission that you're doing and hiring people that are adjacent, want to be a part of that. Because then if you're just continually working on that mission, everyone's driven, they're not going anywhere. And I think that's something I've learned over and over again with business.
And that's I think the big takeaway from this podcast. Everyone always says culture, 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 culture. We just spent 20 minutes on culture and didn't say the word culture maybe more than once or twice.
Totally.
So everything goes into it. But if a non-compete will set the stage of just a lack of trust, right? And then you layer on what you were talking about of, this is what I want out of a person. This is what I look for in the hiring process. This is what I do. Blah 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 blah. The people who will weather the storm knew that stuff and have been practicing that stuff. The people who are going to have a really, really hard time of life in the next year are the ones that just relied on this. So that's what I think is going to be the big kind of takeaway from this is that we'll see. We'll see some clinics spinning, and then we'll see other clinics like with their arms wide open.
That's what's awesome. I'm curious to see if that happens because if it does, I'm excited for us. But I am curious, just for sure.
Nice. Well, we'll keep an eye on it as we always do. All right, cool. Brian.
All right, man.
All right, we'll end it. We'll end it here, and have a great week.
You too, man. See ya.
See ya.